Right. Hi, my name is David Wetton, and welcome to the Conscious Leadership Now podcast. The intent of this podcast is to encourage you as a leader to embrace conscious leadership by giving you access to some of the world's leaders in the field of conscious leadership, both in practice and in thought. My heartfelt wish is that you leave this podcast feeling inspired with ideas to take away and implement in your business or organization to make a real difference in our world. And my guest today is Monica Douglas.
Hello, David.
Hi, Monica.
Hello, listeners.
Welcome. Now, Monica nurtures courageous leaders to be well at times of change and evolution. She's a qualified and experienced wellbeing mentor, wellness coach, and spiritual counsellor for people of any faith or none. She's an international best-selling author, sharing her powerful transformative story in the Pay It Forward series. She's a speaker, transformational coach, expert listener, and trainer with over 20 years' experience of supporting people through personal and professional growth. She creates powerful, safe space for clients to feel nurtured, challenged, listened to, heard, and supported so that they can reclaim their power, speak their truth, and evolve through right action. Monica is a leader and social activist who's worked behind the scenes in equality and social justice throughout her life. She's contributed to change in national and local government, various businesses and community organisations, including Nelson Mandela's Ministry of Justice, Birmingham, Coventry and Derby City Councils. She's a spiritual practitioner, a trained and ordained interfaith minister and spiritual counsellor with the One Spirit Interfaith Foundation, a yoga teacher, a trainer and former trustee at Mandala Yoga Ashram, one of the few authentic, independent and inclusive ashrams in the UK. In 2016, she was part of a team of practitioners and interfaith ministers who volunteered to work at a peace camp in the West Bank between Palestine and Israel as a way of supporting the Israeli, Palestinian and international participants to share experiences of death, grief, healing and forgiveness. She's a business rebel. For over 15 years, she was the creative director of Jones and Clark Limited, an 85-year-old family business who've positioned themselves as experts in industrial sourcing and supply. Here she used core values to work with the team to relocate the business, moving from a 6 to 7-figure turnover, doubling profitability, and establishing the company as an award winner and regional leader. And Monica, it's a delight to have you on this show, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say about conscious leadership.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And before we progress with the questions, we spoke before, Monica, and we're just saying actually we want to be transparent about this particular episode. It really was born out of a conversation that we had together, really out of the sort of the spotlight that we had, I think, as a world around George Floyd being publicly murdered. And you and me, Monica, had a conversation, spoke about the difficulties and really difficulties for both of us in different ways, and perhaps the leaders across the world are having as to how they respond to, how they relate to these issues. And so this particular podcast really stands in this particular ground, and also we're in the midst of COVID as well, in the pandemic. So
yeah,
so Monica, just checking in with you as well as to how you'd like to speak to this.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we really honour this time and the uncertainty and the sense of the unknown. You know, so COVID, we've never had a situation like this in the lifetime of all of us that are present. Real sense of needing comfort, support, ways through the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to be transparent about that, because it, as well as it being a really deep challenge for us, it's a deep opportunity for us to look at how we operate, how the world operates, how our economic systems operate, how businesses operate, how leaders show up for their people, and with the added element of the highlighting of systemic racism and our need to actually look at this across our world as a global issue, You know, again, we've never done this. Not everyone has been invited to the table to do this work, and I feel that as leaders, this is the invitation of this conversation, is to look at how do we as individuals show up and do what we need for ourselves to give us the gravitas and the grounding and the clarity that's needed in order to show the way for others. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And we were sharing beforehand, I just wanted to put my, if you like, my white person's, my white leader's perspective in that I love the words of Michael, or Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith, who spoke just this weekend. And he spoke passionately about this is history in the making. Yeah. It's a time for people to come together. And really, from my perspective, from the white person's perspective, I like what he said about, actually, for white people, you have three options. He said, well, maybe more, but where he stepped it out is actually it's a time you can choose to participate and really take action for the change that he feels and I feel is coming. Or he said you can be a bystander. And really, although he might say it's neutral, it's no action, it's okay. From my white person's perspective, I'm going to say to leaders listening to this that actually I like the words of Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, who says, if you're not saying anything, you're not saying nothing. Ooh. I know, yes. Actually, he says, by being neutral, being a bystander, thinking I won't do anything, or it's okay not to do anything, I'll just watch. It's saying actually you are doing something and you're not doing just nothing. So actually, and then the last one he had was actually you can get in the way. Yeah. That you might choose to act against or whatever you do. So it really comes back, doesn't it, to conscious leadership and really being conscious about this time. And really, a lot of the guests, or quite a few of the guests so far, have spoken about one element of conscious leadership being choice. And this, for me, actually says, this is a choice point. And I like that term, as you probably heard, Monica. For me, it feels like it's a kairos moment, a moment of choice. But for everyone, it's not just it's over there. It's kind of everyone is included in a bizarre way.
Well, that's what feels very different now. That it's not just an issue for Black people. And it's not just an issue for Black people and their awakened allies. Yes. This is an issue for everyone. And I feel that, I've been reflecting on this. As leaders, we're often looking out. We're looking at those people who are looking at us. And what do we present to them? And we've seen this in our own organisation. So, David and I were both interfaith ministers. And it's been really interesting awaiting the response of the leaders in that organisation. So how are we going to respond to this issue of racism and racial unrest and what's happening in our society as the veils are lifted? So we're waiting for it currently. And, no doubt a statement will come. But what I've really been interested in this is, actually, is it our job as leaders, yes, to do our inner work, to actually do our inner work and invite those that are watching us to also do their inner work. So then we can have a dialogue, not on what has, seemingly been the structures before, but what we're seeing now. Because then whatever statement comes from that is different to what's happened before. It's automatically stopped being about those of us who are in the seeming positions of privilege and power, but recognizing that there is a voice underneath. And actually, when we really listen to that, both in ourselves and in those who we're walking alongside or with, then there are gems to be discovered. So that's what I would really like us to explore, is how we do our inner work so that we can invite others to do their inner work, because you can't invite others to do their inner work if you haven't done it, right?
Absolutely. Which is a journey, isn't it? And that's another thing that's come through. But you're quite right, and I think there's something about, and the final thing that came to me as you were speaking, I love what you said, is this aspect of it's stepping into, I think, as a leader, stepping into that vulnerability. And I love what someone said on the podcast to me recently, is actually stepping into that vulnerability as conscious leaders means actually stepping into the place with love. Because with vulnerability, love is always present, but actually vulnerability brings it a little bit more front and center, as I would say. So
Definitely. I would say the love and compassion,
mm,
so that we're because sometimes when we're looking at, I've been looking, this has been my process, I'm talking from experience here, since the murder of George Floyd publicly,
mm,
um I experienced that personally. Watching that video was a trauma, not only a trauma, as a re-traumatizing. So it's almost like I felt the visceral pain of him as my mother, as his mother, or him as my brother, as my
mm,
lover, as my son. And to watch it, and if we really think about what that means, if we were really to put ourselves in that place of witnessing the murder of a beloved, a
mm,
loved one,
mm.
our sense of compassion for that would shift. This isn't a movie. And what would it be if if you truly saw him as your brother? Our actions would be very different to being, as you said, a
Yes.
bystander watching.
Yeah.
We'd go, what are we going to do about this?
Mm, mm.
But it's only if you're in the place of the bystander, or the one that wants to stand in the way of the truth of that being seen and the pain of that being felt, that you could have a kind of logical, oh, there's nothing to be done here kind of attitude.
Yes. Well,
Only if you were resting in those two positions
yes.
and you didn't see him clearly as a brother.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that, because to seeing him as a brother brings that humanity to the table, because the risk is that, particularly as the trial progresses, stuff gets digged up from his past to try to then actually justify the action, when in fact of his brother, it's kind of said, this act in this moment cannot be justified, one iota, period, end of.
Mm.
Put that to one side. That's not relevant here. This is what happened.
Yeah, his whatever, sorry, excuse me, David. um yeah, whatever, I think it's really important that whatever is brought up about his history is actually relevant. The issue for me is that we've witnessed something that has highlighted a systemic issue of
Totally.
racism.
Absolutely agree. And again, I listened to Michael Beckwith actually kind of say, my language, realize this is a lightning rod moment, and that it's not a one-off. It highlights the systemic racism that's happened down the years and continues today.
Yeah.
And again, bringing that front and center, there's a different perhaps then response, and it's not a one-off. It's an ongoing. So we're back to perhaps what we spoke before. This is a choice point.
Yeah, it's a choice point.
For the white leaders, white people, it's a choice point, and it's kind of saying about to how am I then choosing to respond to this, as opposed to, I talk about react or respond, and I would like to encourage, how do I respond? Because for me, respond says,
Yeah,
you know,
I think the most important thing is then to come back to each of us as individuals first and foremost. So not only, as I was saying, I experienced that as a trauma. Anybody who watched that, actually, if you ask most people, have they seen somebody die? Have they actually seen someone die, like in real life? Most people would say they haven't, right? Unless you work in the services, unless you're like me and work with people sometimes at times of threshold, you haven't actually witnessed it. So, and most people have unresolved issues around death and dying. So one of the things I really wanted to talk to people about is how you manage self-care around that, because that will have an impact on your physiology. It'll have an effect on your nervous system. We've already had the huge changes in terms of COVID-19 and what it means to have your routine changed, to be isolated from the people that you love, from having all of your normal support systems disrupted. And then we have this, and then we have everything that's happening on social media around this, and then we get sucked into the rabbit hole of that. And unless you're very conscious of self-care and of limiting your exposure to media, of not getting so caught up in the reaction, as you say, our response is important, but actually our reactions often are based on past patterns that aren't always that what's the word, aren't that conscious, shall we say, and we're talking about conscious leadership here. So how do we bring ourselves into a state of being conscious enough to look after ourselves so that we're responding from a place of being centered, grounded, clear-minded, well in the body, you know, because well-being is my thing. Well in the body, the heart, the mind, and also the soul. Let's not miss out any parts of us. You know, and a lot of people may have been neglecting the food. You know, we had an opportunity to get incredibly well, really, but a lot of people have found comfort in food and alcohol and other things, which means actually the system's already been disrupted.
Yeah.
And then we have all these things on top. So for me, it's a real call to self-care. And I feel that that's the most important thing we can do as leaders, actually, as conscious leaders right now, is to embody that. And then through embodying that, those that are watching us, those that we are supporting, those that we are leading, will also think, oh, I can do that too. And then we're responding, we're looking inside and responding in ways that are adding to the transformation and the evolution in this situation.
We are, and I love that aspect of actually the conscious leader embodying this, because for me that is an element then that actually brings in a real recognition to those that are alongside them, and saying, actually, this is me signaling this is power with, not power over.
Yes, that's the difference. It's like, okay, how do we raise each other? How do we evolve our consciousness and the consciousness of others? You know, if we think about models such as the SQ, spiritual intelligence model, and really thinking, where are we in this? How much more do I need to invite into my life in order to operate from the highest, most vibrant place?
Yes, and that's where, as you mentioned before, all of the aspects of well-being and the element of kind of spiritual intelligence can then actually bring in something I like refer to, you know, through all my teachers, as kind of power through. So actually, with then listening, and listening is important here, but actually listening, you know, we know through our training of listening, as we call, horizontally to the person or people in front of us, and vertically to whatever we may call God, goddess, universe, source, whatever we call that. But for me, then, there's a sense of power through, which brings a presence which actually the ego, for me, can think, David, you've got to do all of this, whereas the power through is kind of actually almost, I've got this. I'm calling you to do your bit in it, but I'm not calling you into overwhelm for bits that you're don't have the gifts to do.
Yes, that's the piece, isn't it? It's like, where are my gifts? Where are my gifts? What is my part in this? First thing, let me do my work. Let me do my work, and from there I can support others to do theirs. Yeah.
Now, we both know, Monica, we've both been, you know, trained through One Spirit in the sense of listening. I like to speak of deep listening, and we're listening almost to whatever you want to call it. We'll go back to, you know, divine, field, universe, whatever is looking to say through me, through you. So I'm conscious here of, you know, before we came onto the podcast, we had a conversation, and I said to you, Monica, does it work that actually we go through the 5 questions on the conscious leadership, and you've had a look through them and said, yes, that's fine. So I just want to check back in with you, because I'm really deeply enjoying the conversation and what you're sharing. So I just want to check in with you. How does it feel? Where do you want to take this now? Do you want to continue the conversation? Does it feel right to you to go into the 5 questions? Where's it landing with you in this moment in time?
For me, I feel the structure of the 5 questions is really useful as a container. I feel that we'll go wherever we need to go in the conversations, but let's use that structure that's there and see where it leads us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And you feel it's the right time to transition into those? Because I sense we've had a really, I think I'll take a breath. It feels like we've had a really powerful conversation between two of us and touched some really deep issues. It's like we've jumped straight into a deep,
Yeah.
deep pool for me, which is absolutely the right place I choose to be.
Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and it feels right for us to transition into that place.
So Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. That's my cue that it's time for you, Monica, to take 5, your take on 5 conscious leadership questions.
Great.
So the first question, and we have already touched on some of these, but the first question is, what does conscious leadership mean to you?
Mm-hmm. So conscious leadership means, to me, to operate from a place of deep wisdom, to be in a position where you are taking all of your being, so body, heart, mind, soul, and to be so aware of what is true in all aspects of you that you're operating from that place. So you've got a real awareness of the physical reality. You've got a real awareness of the emotional flow,
Mm-hmm.
an awareness of the mind and what is present and what is yours, what is collective, and also an honoring of the unique individual that you are and your expression, which I call the soul.
Mm.
And how that links to a wider concept of spirit, whatever that may be for you, whether that's in a specific religious context or not. It could be nature. And that also brings in this sense of environment, because I feel that we need to include the environment as the foundation of our being, which is why a lot of us struggle, because the environments that we're in aren't right. Something environmentally needs to change. So that's what conscious leadership means to me. And for those of us that are, and I'm going to use the word actually, privileged enough to be in that position where we can influence others, it's essential that we move into the place of being conscious.
That's wonderful. I love that. There's so many great points in there for me. And what jumped out for me, which I hadn't thought of before, quite often within this conscious leadership space, people speak about various things, and some will speak about the triple bottom line. So it's not just profit. You need a sustainable business. A profit's important, but it's also people, which we've spoken a lot about. So first of all, you gave me that aspect, that beautiful picture for me of an integrated approach. So looking across all of those aspects, which I loved, and looking at the truth and the soul. And then actually the third P, if you like, is then planet. But actually you then, for me, gave me a different perspective on that, because you spoke about environment. And what came to me is, of course, what a change we're in at the moment, where people are working from home, the way they're responding, reacting, how they're on Zoom meetings and children in the background or whatever, and they're getting to know family and perhaps partners. And so the whole environment, what we work in, including, I guess, if you're at home, back gardens, where I'm at home, my own place in nature, etc., is quite a big shift. I think
shift.
seismic.
Absolutely.
That's the word I was looking for.
It's absolutely a seismic shift in a way that nobody would have been able to predict. So most people think, oh, I'm going to have a sabbatical, I'm going to work from home, or whatever it is. And the reality is now people are like, oh, everything's up for reconsideration. It's like, do we actually need that massive air conditioned office anymore? Did that actually bring us closer together or not?
That's true. And I also had one other thing that came to me as well, which I think is important for conscious leadership. You mentioned about actually when the leadership is called conscious, that they connect, I guess, and it's my words, they connect with their truth.
Yes.
What do you see as, what I want to say is, sometimes, as a leader, and I've no doubt done it myself in the past, I can connect with, I believe, is my truth, but then I can become so passionate about it that I I force it onto others as the truth. Does that make sense? As opposed to my truth becomes the truth. What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is an important thing, right? So as much as I really advocate individual process and working, we're in relationship, right? And what we see as our truth is our bubble. And it's really good to have our bubble popped by engaging with others, by seeing how our interactions impact on others, by moving from, and this is what I've been working a lot with recently, moving from the me to the we.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I don't operate in isolation as much as, sometimes, I would quite like to live in a cave. I love the potential that we have for learning about ourselves through others and what they reflect back to us. Are we really listening? Are we really listening to how they perceive the world? Because they will be perceiving the world in a totally different way to us. And their perception of the world is their truth. Your perception of the world is your truth. Two truths. Oh, what? How can I get all I can do is encourage the dialogue, the space between us, so that I can expand and evolve, and they can expand and evolve and go, oh, there's my truth and there's your truth. Okay, yes. So maybe neither of those truths are the full truth. Maybe we need to consider that both of those things coexist, and maybe there's another perspective altogether. Yes. So this is what expands us out of our little bubble, or our shell, is when we actively search for opportunities to connect. And I loved what you said earlier in our discussion around vulnerability, and I'll come back to that in terms of resources and the questions. But Brené Brown's whole approach of being vulnerable and being courageous, these are the people that I work with. They're the brave and the courageous. I always say that when they come through the threshold, it's you have to be brave and courageous to have crossed that threshold. Are you really ready? Yeah.
And it is important, I think, isn't it? It was a real ha-ha moment for me when I really grasped. I think it was in my interfaith training. We had someone came in from the Hindu background and told a story, but the story was around when people have different views and opinions and can actually lead to fighting. If you can get in a position that actually share passionately what you believe, but actually this is the truth for me. Yeah. The other person says, this is the truth for me, because then it's saying, as you said, it leaves you open to listening. And actually, when we talk about truth from my perspective, it's like, well, it can continually change for me. And I think at the moment in the conversation we're in, my sense is from a white person perspective, our truth or even our unconscious biases are coming up. They're actually rattling what we might have felt was the truth. So here in the UK, it might be, no, we're not a racist country here in the UK. It's not a problem. It's not an issue. So this truth that I was carrying is suddenly up for grabs to say, actually, this is actually based on my own prejudices, my biases, conscious and unconscious. And a sense the ego is running to kind of prove me right, to say, no, there's no problem in the UK, we're fine, it's great. And to pick up on those things that then confirm that to me. And it's very easy to do, because I saw someone, I think it was person of colour, writing about how they lived in Birmingham, how Birmingham was great for them and how it was wonderful. And I could have easily in that moment gone, yeah, there's no problem in Birmingham, not in London, no, UK's fine. But that was me just being aware that I'm looking for ways perhaps to then confirm my bias, be it conscious or unconscious, instead of seeking to listen deeply to what, at this time, I'd say Black, Indigenous, people of colour are actually wanting to share and say.
Definitely. The thing about this work, when we go inside, when we start to look at our patterns, our beliefs, our behaviours, it's challenging. And we'll find all sorts of uncomfortable emotions arising. So anger, guilt, shame, fear, all of these things. And they may present themselves in a different way. They might come out as like righteous indignation. But when you look behind it, maybe it's touching into some kind of guilt. Maybe it's touching into thoughts and feelings that you've never actually had before, because of the structure never highlighting to you that actually you were in benefit of it. You know, if you're not in a situation where you're consciously being discriminated against, it's hard for you to really see it. There's been a very interesting debate on. I'll take it very. I'll give you a personal example on my first Facebook page, where there's been a presence thing of what it means to be a Black woman. And somebody was like, they put pictures of beautiful Black women on Facebook, and it was like, oh, this is nice, I got put up as a picture, do you know? And then underneath it was like, I don't see color. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, because clearly I know that, you know, I'm quite a radiant soul, shall we say. I can hold a space, and I'm in a Black woman's body. And when somebody says they don't see color, it seems a bit odd, and it feels like a missed opportunity for learning and growth. Because actually, one of the things we've been taught often as children is that, shh, don't say anything. You know, the child will go, Mummy, why does she look different to me? Right? Why is her skin black? Really loudly, usually. And the mum will go, shh, don't say it. Don't say that. Don't say that. What does that mean? What message does that give to that kid? That there is something wrong with that person that has Black skin, and I can't say anything about it. In fact, I can't even say that that's what they look like. It's a very small example, but it's how we get things skewed.
Of course it is.
Like if I say that person is Black, there's something wrong about being Black, clearly, because Mummy got really cross. So I'm going to say, I don't see them as Black. And in fact, I don't see them as dark brown, because truly, you know, the amount of melanin in our skin, very few people are actually Pantone Black, right? But we use it as a political term to wake people up. And there's all sorts of things around reclaiming that, because knowing the history of why people used to have to categorize themselves in certain shade colors, which is all linked with colonialism and, you know, and administration, which we don't really talk about. And then we reclaimed it. You know, when I was working in equalities, we were like, yeah, we want to do all of the equal opportunities checklist, right? So we need to know what the demographics are. But in the end, in a way, it's kind of a continuation of the categorization of difference, supposedly in service of improvement. But what I found was a lot of people kind of resented it. It reinforced difference based on inferiority and superiority. Difference is good. We'll, you know, I love, you know, that idea of us not being a melting pot but a salad bowl.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah.
I don't want to have everything mudged up, you know, as much as I like a smoothie sometimes. Generally, I quite like the difference and the difference that comes with the salad. Yeah. So for me, the example that was giving was around being open to see more than we've seen before. Being open to noticing our unconscious bias beliefs that inform our actions, actually, that often are taught to us when we were very small or unconscious and have been floating around for centuries.
They have, haven't they? And you know, again, from a white person's perspective, taking those on as part of the patterns as, you know, white people. So the example you gave about the child, I just kind of had another aha moment that actually that's one piece in this building block or jigsaw that actually starts to put in place white privilege, white fragility, if questions are asked, white superiority, because that's then how they interpret it.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see how it's you know, it's developed within society. Sometimes, because perhaps out of it almost then comes full circle then, Monica, maybe, that if there was discomfort of not speaking in the moment to the child, it's now coming full circle and says, actually, for white people, get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable in now actually stepping into the conversations and actually owning your own discomfort without trying to do it, then centering myself in any conversation. So
that is the challenge, right? It's the challenge. As I said, we've all got our work to do. I was reflecting on my own practice and my own looking inside it. Actually, where have I internalized this? Where have I had the belief that because of the amount of melanin in my skin that somehow I was inferior? Or where have I not spoken up where I needed to speak up? Where have I fit in and been used as a token, for example, and not actually been given credit for my skills, experience, and knowledge? And gone, oh, you know that whole thing about, as kids, this is what on the other side, as a black person, I've been told you have to be twice as good. You have to, that creates a belief that actually I have to be twice as good, and that's an internal stress, right?
It is, yeah, gets internalized. And I was going to say there's a very subtle distinction, but as I said before, I do enjoy listening to Michael Beckwith in these times. He said something that struck me. He said, he was speaking, he said, as a black person, he said, I can accept that I've been victimized, but I also want to say to everyone, I'm not a victim.
Absolutely. I moved out of that place. Being a victim is not a place of power. So it's like, where's my part? What can I do?
Which actually brings us beautifully almost to what's conscious leadership mean to you. I think we've really spoken about a number of issues that are of paramount importance to any leader to really get into, the inner work, use of power. What does this mean in relation to me? And probably actually we've been speaking about, haven't we, of actually having that vulnerability, the courage to have those difficult conversations.
Definitely. So for me, this is an evolutionary process. So moving into the space of conscious leadership is one which will require us all to step up, because I don't see that there are very many models of it actually in day-to-day world. And the reason why is a lot of people that are actually in the position of conscious leadership do so anonymously, because that's part of the job, is to do it, to offer what we offer without counting, without wanting the accolade, without wanting to be placed on a pedestal. So those that are doing the work we don't often know about, because they are behind the organization. They're leading from behind, they're not leading from the front. They're there holding the space, the work is being done, the people are being supported, and the work is happening. And the evolution is happening. They're not at the front going, look at me, right? And through the last few decades in personal development, in spiritual leadership, in all of these areas, which are the areas that I'm particularly passionate about, and in business leadership too, there's been this idea that this has to be about the personality. And we build personality brands. We become the expert. We're known by our name because that's the only thing that's unique about us. Actually, our essence can be unique, and that can go through an organization and not be dependent on us, because essentially if it's dependent on us, it's not sustainable. And what do we want? We want to impact the world in sustainable ways, which means us moving away from that model of
charismatic leadership, isn't it?
Charismatic leader, myname.com. Right?
Yes, I understand.
Right? Because in that model, intrinsically in that model, the ego is at the center of it. And it's really hard, even if your intentions aren't that, not to get trapped in it as soon as you start getting that adoration. the reason why I really am passionate about this is because I found myself getting caught up in it. I got caught up in it, and it's really hard not to.
Yeah.
And it's been really humbling and a bit like, oh, how awful for me to see it, with my passion for wanting to make a difference.
Yes.
Really going, oh, how can that be done? And then looking out there for exemplars and noticing that they're all doing myname.com. So that must be the way. It's not true, actually. And I sat back. I've been involved in an organization for 20 years. This is the bit that's like really humbling. So I'm feeling, you know, like everybody else, feeling a little bit of shame around it, right? A little bit of vulnerability around it. I've been working personally, having my own work, being mentored, supervised by this fabulous organization, the Reach Approach, for 20 years. And this works on this model of principle before profit. Yes, profit is important, but principle before profit.
Yep.
And not leading through personality, leading through values that are instilled in everyone who works in that arena. And whoever is drawn to work in that arena or gain from that arena in some way, shape, or form is initiated in the values.
Yes.
Which are sustainable should those that are in leadership no longer be in leadership, because they will die at some point, right?
Totally.
The essence of the practices, the ethos and the work will continue. So I suppose that's what I hold as the exemplar. I think we're going through the period of the expert, and the next evolution of that is for us to release that and then go, actually, what is needed in the world in terms of values? How can we shift businesses so that they become actually about social value to all?
Absolutely, and although I haven't named it, I think you're answering beautifully around the second question, which is how do you express conscious leadership through your work? So I really hear that coming through the principles. Some may speak about being purpose-led, and then some talk about values, and then it's that embodiment of values. And I like the way you said, you know, it's actually embodied in all of the people in the organization in their own unique way, in the area that they're in.
Yep.
And Brené Brown, who, you know, you've spoken about, I also love. You know, from my experience going as a consultant, it can be too often that actually the values have been beautifully thought through, but quite often it's a top team exercise. Then the values go up on the wall, and as Brené Brown says, they then become what she calls a cat poster. They're cute, they look good, but actually don't mean anything. So she's, in a direct way, she says, take them down. If you're not going to actually embody these values in the organization at all levels and have inclusion around those values as to what it means to the people in their roles, then why are you having these values in the first place?
Yeah, as you say, they look good, but they're not embodied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, actually, what was it? Because you obviously in the introduction, I spoke of how, you know, in the family business that you took values into the business and it made a change. What part did they play for you as part of your, you know, expressing your, I can just call it embodied conscious leadership?
Yeah, I mean, for me, we did this work. It's a small family business. It's easier to do in a small family business than to do, obviously, in a huge corporation. But, you know, Don Miguel Ruiz, 4 Agreements, and I'd been working with them personally. So this is the pattern, right? Work with them personally, embody them yourself, and then train and talk to people about, you know, and recruit to those values. And, you know, it's easier if you're starting something from scratch. It's hard to do it, you know, as an 85-year-old business. It's got a lot of entrenched ways of being. But it did create a shift by me embodying those values and then working in that way and leading from that place. And you know, if I'm really honest with you, it was incredibly challenging because there are key people who weren't really interested.
Yeah.
And that's where things fall down and aren't sustainable. So as leaders, we need to make sure that we have the right people in place who embody the values that we truly want to live by and work by.
Which is a wonderful point, because it goes back to, doesn't it, what we were just talking about, that it's we, not me. And it's not about the charismatic leader. I think under that, I'm going to call it an older paradigm. Yes, of course, they had an impact. But I always like saying, actually, from my perspective, they were about developing followers as opposed to empowering leaders. And I think that ties into your point, sustainability, that actually if you had a charismatic leader, they could do great things perhaps for a certain period of time, but when they left, the organization then became to some extent a bit rudderless, because no longer were the followers were like, well, the leader's gone, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Whereas,
exactly.
you know, the more conscious leader is pertinent about actually, is that beautiful, actually developing a team of conscious leaders who may actually go to other organizations, and I think there's a blessing around that, saying actually we're going out further into the world, but there's conscious leaders in the organization that can step forward and can take that organization to different places then, because there's expressions for me in moments of time, and that organization as a living entity lives and breathes, and we don't know, it can be you can be leader, even a conscious leader there, as they say, you know, for a reason, a season, or perhaps for a long period of time, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, in this moment, everyone has an opportunity to lead on this new wave of their life, right? Because, you know, we have an opportunity to go, what is here?
Yeah.
What is here? Who am I? You know, let's go back to the old existential question, right? Who am I? We've had, through COVID-19, we've really had have an opportunity to reassess what we think life is and what's important to us.
Yeah.
And you know, there are always moments like this. You know, we started our conversation talking about this as a choice point. Every moment is a choice point, David.
Yes.
Every moment is a choice point.
And in some ways, isn't that, I think that feels to me to be freeing. And I wanted to ask you, because I shared with you before I came on the program that a friend had sent me a message and said, you know, I really want to get involved and understand more about, you know, diversity, inclusion, equity, but I'm frightened about saying the wrong thing. And this is a white person.
Yeah.
I know you and me have spoken about this before, but I know, you know, and I remember, you know, when we spoke before, I'd love to hear, you know, what you say to that.
You will say the wrong thing.
Yes, that's what you said.
And you may get a backlash.
Yeah.
And it will sting and it will hurt, but you will live. And you will learn if you're open to it.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really powerful place to be, right? It's like, you will get it wrong. I would be like absolutely stunned if you never got anybody come back and go, hold on a minute, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you really want to do the work, know that you're not going to be liked by everyone. Know that the learning opportunity is for you to close your mouth and open your ears. And let people know that your ears are open. So there's this whole thing at the moment about whether being silent is complicit or not, right? Yep. Silence can only be perceived to be complicit if you've not put yourself in the arena, coming back to Brené Brown, right?
Yeah.
If you've not placed yourself in the arena and said, I'm trying to work this out, I don't know, have the humility to say, I don't know, and then maybe you might learn, right? Because your experience is unique. Other people's experience is unique. So you will only know by asking. You'll only know by listening. So be willing, be vulnerable enough, be humble enough be open enough to learn.
Yep. Yep.
And you know, I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. You know, people are saying, why don't you just get in there? And I'm like, I'm going to be who I am. Somebody can see me, they can see me. If they can't, I will radiate my light. I will have a conversation with them. I will see them as my brother and sister, because this is the thing, right? When we really see all humanity as our family, when we really see that, not just conceptually, but when we really feel and see that, things shift in how we operate, in how we relate. If we're courageous enough to look at the barriers within us that stop us from seeing the world that way.
That's wonderful. So I'll kind of say, you know, for me, it's actually having that vulnerability, that courage to actually step in, almost get over myself in order to step into the arena.
Get over yourself. That's what I would say. None of us are all that.
No. And actually, I'm just reminded, actually, and you know, I think for white people such as myself, you know, who are leaders who are in this arena, one of my friends, Paul Zalazar, white friends of awarepreneurs, said 3 things recently that struck a chord with me. First thing he said, which I think is important, really critical, he was just inviting white friends, white colleagues to be in this. It is a journey, but to be in it for the long haul. Comes back, I think, to what I said earlier. Too often, and I can be guilty of that, it's a one-off. I've posted something on whatever, my social media thing, that's it, I've done it, right, and go back to business as usual. No, he said, be it in for the long haul. Then he said very cleverly, actually, if you're in it for the long haul, it is about being relational.
Yes.
So like we had a conversation before this, or whoever we're talking to, actually it's about the conversations, because the arena is the conversations.
Yeah.
As you said, you know, if you just said beautifully, get over yourself, have the conversation, you're going to make a mess of it at times. You know, be prepared to accept that, know that, be comfortable with the uncomfortable, but it's a relational. So it's being prepared to reach out and have those conversations. And the last thing he said was actually, in this relational element, if you can also then ground it in community, that can also then really support you. And both you and me were just talking about what role does one spirit play in this as a community. So I can see these elements coming together. So they're not, as we said, it's not the answer, but it is a answer that resonates with me. And I guess my encouragement would say, well, seek out, you know, the answer for you, you know, those that are listening, white colleagues, because, you know, I am a believer that actually it's almost, isn't it? It's like I don't know why I'm saying this, it's like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he doesn't know if he can go across the cavern or not. When he takes the first step and puts his foot out, the bridge then appears.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a bit like that, I think. It's kind of saying, take that first step out, and then, you know, trust that bridge, whatever it may be, will appear for you.
So I hear what you're saying in terms of white leaders. My invitation would also be for Black leaders and leaders of colour to also do our work, right? We've been swimming in this water too. We're not immune to our own inner bias, our own systems of internalized racism towards ourselves and others. Right? And I'm not detracting by saying that. I'm saying we're all part of this work. And that will mean that the piece where we're relating to each other will have more ease, actually, if we all do this work and see inside our guilt, our shame, our internalized inferiority and superiority.
And I think that's important. And I love, I think, you know, in the intro that I read for you around, actually, you know, as well as the listening, kind of holding a safe space.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if we're looking at embodying conscious leadership, I think that's a good word for these times, that the conscious leader, and it's a team, because we're just saying it's never just about me, but actually there's something about actually empowering a safe space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And tying into what you said, and this is really, I think, conscious leadership, you know, a safe space with the courageous to actually give permission that there will be mistakes being made.
Yeah.
and there's even at times that safe space may not feel safe to you in that moment, but as long as it's held, it will come back at some time to be a safe space. Because when I've held groups, I've known at times in my language processing has had to be done outside the group, but then people come back in and say, oh, thank you, I needed to do that outside of the group, and I'm really thankful for this space.
Yeah.
Um,
This is it. This is what I feel is essential to the work that I do. It's the safety of the space, the opportunity to do the individual work and the group work. Yeah.
And often on this podcast, I speak about whether it's coming through or not, and my joke side is quite often I can hear the listeners saying, David, ask that question. I really want you to ask Monica that question. So I might ask Monica that question that's coming through at the moment. And I don't want to make it technical because it's a real practical on the ground issue. But they're asked, raise it, David, ask it. So the question I wanted to ask was, it's this thing that actually it's been raised over, 30 years ago now. There's this question by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw when she spoke about intersectionality. So, and she actually said that actually, particularly race and gender can intersect with overlapping impact. And the example she gave, I think she was in court as a lawyer, solicitor, and a black woman was on trial. And what she understood is that court could handle racism, the court could handle sexism, but they couldn't put them both together, and they didn't understand the cumulative impact of both together.
Yeah.
So really, I just wanted to invite you to speak to that because she then goes on to say actually discrimination or the race aspect, is different for a black woman from a black man, or it's different from a black woman to a white woman if we're talking sexism. So how does that feed into you around this conscious leadership conversation? What would you say to conscious leaders around that?
Yeah, I think this is a really valid point. And if you bring in the other aspects such as sexuality and disability or ability or any of the other itties, right?
Yep.
Just see how complex it is to hold it. We can't hold it.
Yeah.
We can't hold it. And I think when we will retreat to type and go, okay, I can't possibly conceive of the personal experience of this individual who has all of these potential social constructs overlaying who they are.
Yeah.
Right. So the one way of doing that is for us to acknowledge what is present, listen to that person. Oh, what? Listen to what they say in terms of their experience of the world. So this comes back to this core practice of knowing that someone's experience may be so different to yours, and that your job is to listen and to acknowledge, even if you don't agree, acknowledge that that's that person's experience and ask what needs to happen in order for them to feel safe, in order for them to feel heard, in order for them to move through whatever process it is, in the same way that you would if it was your son or your daughter.
Thank you. And another light bulb moment for me, actually, in that as you were speaking, it's a sense of whoever's there in the room in front of you, I can easily assign a characteristic to a whole group without realizing, as you just said, actually their experience, it might be, I'll choose Indigenous in respect, it might be an Indigenous person, but they may well have grown up in a different place to another Indigenous person in the room, and they'll have similarities, but they might have quite differences in the way they experience it. And I can easily drop into, well, it'll be like that for you.
Yeah. How do you know?
Right? I don't know, do I?
No, you don't. And it's a very interesting thing. I was talking to somebody the other day about the experience of being a black woman who's been brought up in predominantly white spaces to a black woman who's been brought up, in a more diverse, maybe urban environment. Two different experiences. And if you spoke to both of those women, they would talk about their experience in different ways. And you will only know when you talk to them.
Yes. Yeah.
what their experience is.
Yeah. So that's a really powerful, I think, aspect of actually saying the conscious leader seeks to almost be with the individual that's in front of them.
Yeah, and to recognize what's there, acknowledge what's there, and then move into a space where you can see more than, right? So ultimately, beyond our categories, beyond our checkboxes, who is this soul in front of you? But you can't get to that. I don't want to encourage this idea of spiritual bypassing, right? We're not getting to the love and the light without going through the field.
Yes.
Let's go through the field and walk, continue to walk and release whatever needs to be released, acknowledge whatever needs to be acknowledged, and then you can get to that place.
Because it's part of the journey, it's been part of the spiritual formation, hasn't it?
There we go.
So by jumping straight to light, love, everything is fabulous, you're actually bypassing the richness of that journey, that story, and you're actually bypassing the, from the Buddhist perspective, that suffering, that hardness, that sense
learning.
of the learning, the sand that's created the pearl for that particular person, and so it's important to have that in the room. So thank you for that. We did touch on, I don't know the answer, the third question I had was, and we touched on it briefly, but I'll come back to it, whether there's an exemplar of conscious leadership for you or not.
Yeah, so I would cite the Reach Approach doc.
Okay.
It's reachapproach.co.uk. It's a counselling and psychotherapy practice. And I think I really want to reference this at this time, is that we talk about the pandemic of COVID and its impact on us physically. The true pandemic that is coming is one which is a mental health crisis. Because people have been locked in for all of this time. All that you would normally avoid is right there in front. So there's the rise in domestic violence, child abuse, all of these things that aren't really being looked at. And for me, I'm using the Reach approach as an example. They've got practitioners all over the world, because, as I say, the values of principle before profit, of moving from the me to the we, of really giving people resources and space to really be who they are, and to not be wedded into any particular tradition. So, spirit is there, but it's purposely not linked to any particular faith. It's not, there's no dogma around it. It's just like, what is that which is greater than? And what is here in terms of the body. So, I've been drinking my water throughout our interview. It's like simple practices such as having enough water for the body to function and the brain to be hydrated enough for you to have cognitive capacity. These simple practices that make a huge difference
to the functioning, and realizing all these elements do come together.
Synergy. This is the piece, right? So recognizing that history is part of where we are now. Religion and faith is part of the evolution of science, actually. So what science and what religion was doing to science 400 years ago in terms of suppressing it, science is doing now to religion. What would it be like if we actually pulled the gems from faith, if we lived by the golden rule, and in our businesses, if we thought, oh, we wouldn't want to be treated like that as a client or a customer, let's do better. Let's do better. If we really, all of the, it's like the personal development movement, all of the things that people are selling as new things are essentially ancient knowledge and wisdom repackaged.
Totally.
Right?
Couldn't agree more. Yes.
So let's just look at the past. Let's look at the ancient knowledge and bring it here into the future. Yes, and acknowledge it rather than pretend that it's something new. So this is where it's come from. It has provenance.
which then for me actually, you know, whether we don't use the term spiritual, I like the aspect that means that if I'm looking at that, I am standing on the shoulders of spiritual giants, standing on the shoulders of
Yes.
of their heartfelt embodiment at that moment in time as to, you know, what they were doing at that moment and that moment in time. I mean, it may look different from where we sit now in 2020, but
Yeah.
to honor that and say there's some nuggets, as I call it, wisdom nuggets on here. There's nuggets in there that we can use.
Definitely.
And I guess, sorry, just go on, you finish what you were
No,
saying.
I mean, I think this is a really important point. I also wanted to bring in, because we've been talking about race a lot, I want to bring in our ancestry.
Yeah.
So we can't deny our ancestry
Yes.
and what flows through our genes and our veins. We can transform things, we can change things, but we can't deny them.
Yes. Yeah.
As though somehow time heals all wounds. I don't think that's true. Action does. If you've
Yes.
got a wound, you've got to find the wound. I wrote about this the other day. You have to find the wound. When you find the wound, and sometimes it's behind us or inside us, so we don't know it's there, and someone else has to point it out. Either somebody behind us has to point it out, or we have to have an internal imagery to find the wound. We have to find the wound. Once we've found the wound, if there's anything that's still aggravating, we need to clear it. You know, and then we can bandage it with love, and then we can heal. You can't get through the process without acknowledging the wound.
Yes, yes. And knowing, as you said, that actually ancestry, we know from science that actually, you know, they've proved the genes actually come forward and have an impact on us now. So that ancestry does have an impact. And again, you know, just, was it this week, last week, you know, these connections that you have, you know, I was at university in Bristol, so to see the bronze statue of Edward Colston coming down, thrown into the harbour here in Bristol in England, but knowing actually that he was up there for, you know, the good that he did to society, but then the unknown thing, he was a Bristol slave trader.
Yeah.
And I hadn't fully realised or understood that story. I knew aspects around Bristol on the slave trade, but not the Colston story. And realising there was the Colston Hall there, because some event that I used to go to as a teenager at university, listen to some great bands. And I think two or 3 years ago they said they're changing the name, and they're doing that now. But that's just something that comes up and says, well, for me, that's part of this ancestry that's here, but really isn't brought into the room. It's not really spoken about, or if it is spoken about, it's from the perspective of, he was a great philanthropist. He did great things for this city.
Yeah.
And whilst
it's not
one
the whole
thing,
picture.
it's not the whole picture, it's part of it. So and it's coming back to our theme on this, you know, it can then get into an uncomfortable conversation because it's the whole thing around that.
Yeah.
So we've touched a little bit on, just to close out this question, you've mentioned, you know, was it Reach organization?
Yeah, the Reach approach. Yeah.
Reach approach. I'll put a link on the podcast to this. What other resources have you found helpful around conscious leadership you'd like to share with the viewers, listeners?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love Brené Brown's work. I think it's incredible. I think she's this model of encouraging courage and vulnerability. Changes the landscape if we truly take the invitation to step into that. And I said I also would look at including spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence in our frameworks, because spirituality is excluded when actually it can bring a really powerful dimension to our leadership.
And I know who springs to mind for me when I think of spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence. Are there certain people that spring to mind who would want to highlight?
So it's Cindy Wigglesworth's work.
Yeah.
And
that's spiritual intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah, for spiritual intelligence, you just go back to classics, with like Daniel Goleman, and just they're there. The classics are there, right? So let's go back to the classics. Look at the work. Use the principles. Evolve the principles through practice.
Yes, it is. Yes, and really, I think emotional intelligence is about what we've been talking about today. So, am I aware of myself? Am I aware of others? Well, my self thing, how am I showing? I'm aware of my own things, I'm aware of how I'm showing up, and then I'm aware of others and how am I showing up with others. So it's this me, we, self, what I call being, doing, self, others. It's this dimensional aspect piece of work, which I think conscious leaders are aware of. I get to my fourth question. I hope, people that are watching and listening will kind of sense when I say this piece, that's obvious, David, for Monica, this inner life is a source of conscious leadership. But I will share for those that are new around this, and where this comes from for me is when I did some research, I came across Professor Jody Fry, who's at Texas A&M University. He speaks about spiritual leadership, and I'll call it conscious leadership, but his research, and it's almost about 20 years now, is saying that inner life is the source of conscious leadership. Where he's saying inner life is perhaps a spiritual, contemplative practice, might be a straightforward, just a reflective practice, walking, nature, meditation, etc. So I wanted to ask, you, Monica, what practices have you found helpful and why?
Okay. So for me, I would always encourage people to have nature-based practices to remind us that we are nature. So this brings in this environmental aspect and reminds us that we're part of that. We are that, in fact. So nature-based practice is very simple, as simple as going for a walk, grounding your feet. People always I'm like, get your shoes off and get the socks off and get barefoot. And people go, oh, can't possibly. I'm like, when's the best time you feel? When you're on holiday and you've taken your shoes off and you're walking on a beach. Hello, it's the same thing.
Yes.
Right? It's actually it really calms your nervous system. If there was only one thing, it would be that, or to drink enough water. Make sure that you're in touch with the fact that we are vertical rivers. And in order to function effectively, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, we need to allow ourselves to be in flow. And, these aren't, you're not having to sit down and meditate for 2 hours. This is practical stuff that you can do every day. So I would encourage that. And I have I'll put in the resources list, I have a 7-day nurturing journey that takes people through the elements of nature to do between 5 and 15 minutes every day. It's fun, but it's all very simple things.
Wonderful.
But,
give me the link to that, or if you've got a document, send it. Give me the link. If you've got a link, it'd be great.
Link to that. Yeah, and people just sign up and do it. It's perfect. And then a really interesting one for me is that actually joy is a very positive emotion to be experiencing, especially at a time where there's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
My way is, and I'm a little bit off piste, I suppose, but it's dance, right? How many of us are so like, oh my God, I couldn't possibly dance, right? It's like, it's a natural thing. Babies, they hear the music, they're just like this.
Yeah.
In a minute, your state changes. In a minute. Doesn't matter if you can or can't dance. You're not doing it as a performance. You're just doing it to change your state, to move your body, make that connection between the mind, the body, the heart, and just be there, be present. So again, I'll put a couple of links at the bottom of this, because I just encourage people to move, because I think we're too, one of the things coming out of all of this work on Zoom is we can get more screen time than we've ever had, been more sedentary than we've ever been, and it's not good for us.
No, we're someone's part, and this is it's a spiritual perspective. Our doing comes out of our being, and our being is precisely the well-being, those elements you're speaking about now. Water, time in nature, dance, whatever resonates in that, but connecting with that. And I think that's that is really important.
Absolutely. And the other core practice I would say is some form of reflective practice or silent time. Now, I'm not going to say that you have to practice a particular method. It could be just sitting, being aware of your breath, and that would be enough. If you want to learn how to use different processes and practices to meditate, do that. But essentially, the simplest thing that we have in us for as long as we're living is our breath. And I suppose I'm all for practice, David. So can we just have 5 seconds of that? Just being here. Allowing ourselves to be with our breath. Nothing to do with it, nowhere to go with it, but noticing it in our body, and how quickly that can change our state, how quickly that can bring us into our body, out of the chattering mind, into this moment. It's not complicated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think probably as two interfaith ministers, if you like, I can speak for myself that, from my understanding, whatever that spiritual practice or practices are, again, perhaps a theme, it doesn't have to be forever. Whatever you choose, try something that resonates with you. It doesn't have to be the most popular thing, and be what resonates.
Yeah.
I think what I get for me is actually, it's a moment where actually, that I can, conscious moment, where I can actually choose to connect with God, Goddess, divine source, whatever I call it. But perhaps more importantly for me, to know that I perhaps consciously has chosen that, but that connection is always there 24/7.
Definitely. Well, the thing that I really wanted to do is also enable people to open up to this concept of spirit, God, the divine, in a way that they've never thought about before. I'm as part of what's been going on with our working through systemic racism, I created a meditation, and it's a meditation that's got a visual and it's got an audio to it, and it's quite challenging because in it presents a concept of God, the divine spirit, in a way that most people have never thought about. And it might just be enough to mess with your concept enough to think that this could be bigger than I've ever thought of. This could be different. And this would, if I felt that there was any sense of this being possible, that it would change how I interact with everyone I meet in the world. So I'm going to put the link to that.
Please do. And I get a sense there that you're inviting people into a profound, joyous sense of curiosity.
Yes, it's all about that.
And
curiosity.
And again, I've mentioned, Michael Beckwith a few times here, but I love how he speaks about, when you ask these powerful, empowering questions, what if it's about this? What if this was to happen? What's this, that actually invites people into that space. And then we both know that's a space when actually it's a space where transformation can happen. Sometimes in the most incredible ways, in the ways you don't anticipate, as well as perhaps going into that space and thinking, this is it, it's going to happen, and sometimes it doesn't. But that space is there, without stepping in, you'll never know. And kind of saying, without stepping in, my last question is the one, given unlimited time and resources, what single thing would you recommend aspiring conscious leaders to do?
Learn to listen. Learn to listen to yourself. Know what's going on inside. And actively practice listening to others. Really, really listening. And as my mentor says, it's like, notice whether you're really listening or you're waiting to speak.
And that is just, I think that in itself is a transformative moment. And I know that one of the tools I've seen that has worked profoundly around that is just in a circle where you use whatever, a talking stone, a talking stick. And then actually I have found when that's been used, people then get away from, it's my, thinking about what I do next. They're present with what's being said.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to them, actually what they say probably changes because they've been present with what was being said.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
So I could hear the sound of an ice cream van. I don't know
I
if this is
know. I was like, oh, Mr. Whippy.
so I shall ask
An
you.
example of distraction.
It is, isn't it? So we'll come back, and I've shared with you now. I love Columbo, so I have he always asks just one more thing. So I always have a just one more thing question.
Yeah.
And this is really, we spoke before on the program when you spoke that for you, one of the aspects for you as a Black businesswoman is the visibility and the credibility equals opportunity.
Yeah.
So this one here to give you visibility is really kind of share your own resources you're offering, which you feel may be helpful. And again, I'll put links below. So what would you like to share? How do people get in touch with you? What's on your heart to offer?
So what I would love is for people to connect with me on LinkedIn and message me and let me know your thoughts around this podcast and what it's brought up in you. That would be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And my offer to you is this meditation that will enable you to just open up to the possibility of things being different. It may shift you, it may not, but be curious and open and listen and look at the image and see what comes up for you. I'll also put the links to the dance and the nurturing journey. Why not? So as you say, some things appeal to some people and don't to others, but I'll put those there for you to explore. For those of you that really feel connected and as though there's a resonance between us that you want to explore more, I'm currently looking for people who want to do this work. So I have an offering which is called the Circle. And in the Circle, there are eight people that come together with this courageous and brave leaders who come together to explore this. What is it that's actually deeper, that's wanting to be uncovered? It's almost like we're inviting in an exploration of the wild, the dark, and the hidden. And through that, how you can be more authentic, you can stand more in your integrity through this deep exploration of your whole being, body, heart, mind, and soul, and opening to spirit in whatever shape or form. So a very closely held, deep, wide space from which to do that work. So if you're listening and that feels like a pull, then get in contact me and talk to me about the Circle. And I was thinking about how I want to do my work differently. I really want to encourage that circle, the next circle that I do, to be diverse.
Yeah.
To invite us to stand and sit in circle in true diversity, because we're the right people to be in that circle right now. And for me to be deliberate and open and ask people where they're coming from, what they want to bring and share, and purposely invite us to be uncomfortable together.
I really like that.
So yeah, so connect with me on LinkedIn. Look at the links that David will put below. And and when you work, this is one thing that you could do. If you've worked with somebody, or if you've listened to somebody who has impacted on you, who doesn't currently have the visibility that you feel they really need, put a recommendation on LinkedIn. Refer them to somebody that you know. Actively support them to come on your podcast, your show, speak in your organization, lead them training. Do that work, because that's how you can make a difference. That's how you can increase people's visibility and credibility in a very practical way. And I'm not wanting you to do it for just anyone. If there are people who are truly excellent, that's who you want to build up. There's a post that I put on LinkedIn the other day, and it was about Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald. There was a time when obviously Marilyn Monroe was the biggest thing in entertainment in the US. And Ella Fitzgerald could not play in the most popular nightclub of the time. So Marilyn had privilege. So those of you who are uncomfortable with the word privilege, this is an example of someone who has privilege. She's beautiful, she's white, she's got power. So she was able to talk to the manager who ran that bar. And what she said was, you know, if you put Ella, who is currently unable to be in that stage because of her race and her shape and her gender, right? Because she's unable to do that. If you do that, if you put her on that stage, I will come and be in the front row each night for those 5 nights, right? I will be there. One, because she's excellent and I love her and I want her to be able to play in this place and I want her to be visible and I want her songs to be known throughout the world, right? So she did it, but she had to put herself out.
Yes.
And so Ella then gave credit to Marilyn for being ahead of her time, for being a beautiful soul, and for being a conscious leader.
Wonderful. And it's a great example of what you and me were talking about before, that actually, you know, Marilyn made sure that she wasn't, for Marilyn, you know, a best kept secret, because she actually put her forward and said, here she is.
Here she is. You have to listen. Listen to her voice. It's amazing. And Ella never played small clubs again.
Which just shows the power, doesn't it, of that, actually, you know, using the white privilege. And I would say, you know, to white friends, not, and then, you know, as you know, one thing you've taught me today is not be frightened of white fragility coming up, because it will do. We get things wrong, but step in and do it anyway.
Yeah, feel the fear and do it.
Yes.
Anyway.
Well, Monica, just thank you so much for being on the podcast and really just showing up in the world of conscious leadership in the way that you do, you know, with the links that I've put below. You know, some heartfelt wish for all of the guests that come on the show, that people feel touched to move. Really, for those that are listening and watching, that are kind of thinking, yeah, it sounds good, I really love Monica, do some work in whatever vein, or listen to her meditation, please do that. Don't just think, oh, I might do it. You know, make a note and take a conscious action on this one.
Definitely, yeah. That's the most important thing we can do. One step at a time, one action at a time, knowing that sometimes we'll mess up and that's okay.
Wonderful. So thank you. I really, really appreciate this time with you. And I hope, you know, for you as the listeners, that it's been a time of, you know, of really, you know, perhaps sometimes challenging questions, but really heartfelt time that actually you feel it's been worthwhile your time on, been listening to and watching this podcast. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And as I draw this podcast to a close, what I'm going to share is, I just wanted to, well, close, if you like, to thank really all the listeners that are, or listeners are watching this, listening and watching this podcast. And if you're willing, if you feel you benefited from this, please do share a link to this podcast with those you think would truly benefit from it. Because I do truly believe that now is the time for conscious leadership. And with all the inspiring, heartfelt work you as listeners are doing and sort of conscious to doing, I have no doubt that conscious leadership will become a thriving reality, making a difference for the greater good of all. So until next time, I'll leave you with a blessing from John O'Donoghue. May the light of your soul bless the work you do with the secret love and warmth of your heart. And so it is.
And so it is.